Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Nicholas. I'm a partner here at KPMG Isle of Man, and welcome back for the final webinar of our series, Preparing for the New Reality. It's fair to say the 6 weeks has gone very quickly. It's hard to believe that we aired our first one of the series when we were still in lockdown. Social distancing was in place. Now we're in a very different position, and it's almost back to business as usual, but in our own little private bubble. And so for the last time, how's your week been? Here at KPMG, we're all back in. It's fair to say that our staff, even though we offered flexibility to our staff, actually most of them have decided to come back in. I think they really missed the collaboration side. And we were just talking before this, in particular, we train a lot of accountants, we have a lot of trainees, and it's hard to coach those junior members of staff and train them over a Teams call. So certainly our guys have enjoyed being back in. There's a lot of phrases during COVID that have been unearthed out of our vocabulary. Lockdown, furlough, social distancing, self-isolating, track and trace, something I normally associated probably with my Amazon shopping. And one that I'm going to be using this weekend is staycation, when my family and I turn ourselves into local tourists in a camper van. So do hoot if you see us. But I guess on to more economic factors. Yesterday morning we saw Minister Cannon deliver his blueprint for the Isle of Man's economic fight back in the wake of the global pandemic. Headlines from the update include pledging 100 million from the general reserves to help stimulate the economy further, create jobs via a new recovery fund, borrowing powers of up to 250 million to ensure the Treasury has enough cash flow to fund the recovery and the accelerated capital programme, with a focus on, of course, supporting the economy and particularly construction. In terms of the outlook, the initial COVID-19 response with all the business and salary support schemes would have cost the government about 70 million, much lower than was previously anticipated. And it outlined that public finances are down by about 190 million in the worst case scenario due to reduced revenue, and 120 in the best scenario. So quite a stark picture, but certainly I think you'll all agree it could have been a lot worse. But of course, it's well worth remembering we're not out of the woods yet. And then finally, to finish, I guess, the introduction on a positive note, today is day 63 with no cases. Of course, the border policy was lowered on Monday to stage 4, but I think we all know that realistically we won't be able to freely move until we get to stage 2. So many of us will be thinking about those holidays that we had booked and what are we going to do. But I guess on to this week, the usual housekeeping. If you have any problems with the connection whilst we're on, please do click the reconnect button at the top and it will refresh you back into the room. Any questions you have, and we've got a live, all of the live sessions today, so please do send us questions either in the chat box on the right hand side or email webinars@kpmg.co.im. Last week we looked at the consumer and how businesses need to adapt to meet those consumer needs, and this week we wrap up the series, and we're today looking at finance and digital transformation, and essentially what transformation needs to happen behind the customer interface in order to operate effectively for the next decade. I'm really pleased to be joined by Maurice Lips, who's Managing Director of KPMG's Finance Transformation team back in London. He'll be providing us with an overview of what finance transformation really means, and probably touch on KPMG's thinking on this around powered finance, and equally the client trends that he's seeing. And then certainly in the room, I'm pleased to be joined by Chris Corlett from MBS, who's been helping a number of businesses with their data integrations and digital transformations, certainly over COVID and before, and I'm no doubt beyond. And then lastly, I'm joined by Bryan Beesley, who many of you will know, and leads our cyber and privacy teams here in the Isle of Man office. We'll be talking to Chris and Bryan later, but firstly, we thought we'd watch a brief video to set the scene for what Maurice is going to be talking to us about. And then Maurice, it's over to you.
good morning, everybody. As Simon mentioned, I am London-based. We have not yet returned to our offices here in the Big Smoke, so I'm dialing in from home. So hopefully people around me are not downloading anything from Disney Plus or Netflix at the moment, and we should be all right. Apologies for the video, but if I kind of briefly set the scene of what that video would have shown you in terms of key messages from the market. If we wrap our arms around that and we look around the key kind of trends that we see in the industry that really give us the impression that the pressure on organizations, but specifically the finance function, is ever increasing. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I think it's important to note that there is a wide mosaic of different drivers that really trigger a need, not a want necessarily, but a need to transform their organizations above and beyond what they've done over the last couple of years. So to call out a couple out here, and I know you guys had the consumer webinar last time around, you would have heard there that the needs from the consumers are changing, staying in contact with what they want, what they need, how they want to be serviced, and really understanding what you as organizations have to provide to keep them happy and keep them connected to your businesses is absolutely crucial, but very challenging. I also like to lift out the attracting talent in a highly competitive marketplace. Right? If I look at my kind of clientele in FS, and I look at the changes in roles and profiles of what they will be looking for in the future to attract, those are not necessarily the people at the moment that would look at FS companies to submit their resumes. So how do you make sure you are becoming attractive for those kind of people to start thinking about you, the FS clients, as a potential area to expand their careers? Regulation has been written about quite a lot in terms of controls, but most importantly, trends that we see now around self-serve, RegTech, i.e. the regulator will actually run their own reports from your systems. That is upon us in the near future. And that will obviously make a lot of people, especially in finance, cringe, because their data is not necessarily ready to be used, viewed, or reported upon without manual intervention. And then the last one on the list is about the new technologies. It was landed, I'd say, in the wider industry many moons ago, and the terms that people are using, running from natural learning, languages, to robotics, to intelligent automation, to cloud computing, they're all beautiful and they all serve a purpose, but none of those in isolation will provide you with the answers and the solutions that you're looking for. So the question then becomes, from a KPMG point of view, all of those different trends, if we were to summarize those into the kind of 4 key areas, the 4 key kind of call outs that we feel are important to take note of, we really feel now is the time that finance has to seriously disrupt itself, right? Making minor changes to their processes, to their systems, thinking about offshoring, has all happened in the past. This is the time to really make a step change. And there's 4 key trends that we are seeing in the marketplace. Top left side, it's thinking like a venture capitalist, right? So finance in a lot of cases is still seen as a part of the organization that runs standard processes on a daily, monthly, and quarterly basis to run reports. What we think is finance should be on the forefront of making very strategic decisions with the CEOs and the leadership team, and should be the catalyst for those. So our view is that finance should start thinking about the venture capitalists and placing their bets, thinking about return on investments. I think it's fair to say a lot of finance functions would do a multi-year budget, multi-year transformation plan, and then kind of lose track of the realization of benefits that they originally put into their business cases. So that has to really change. On the right-hand side, coexisting in the cloud. Cloud was obviously introduced many years ago and was seen as one of the kind of magic formulas to really relieve the finance function from an awful lot of architecture and data centers that were owned and run by organizations themselves. One of the things I call out there are the 2 bullets on the bottom of the cloud section. One of them is around strategic alliances, and that's the one I'll pick up in a little bit later on in a bit more detail. But there is a trend towards really going back to the core principles of finance and have strategic alliances, set partnerships for all the other components that they currently have in-house and might have a contract with some external providers. But having a strategic alliance that goes above and beyond that is a trend that will reduce the baseline quite significantly. And that links into the last point on that section, which is there's a ripple effect. If you were to do that, to really transform your business, there is a risk curve there around resilience from the people that you're doing business with, third-party risk assessments, etc., etc. So the way that you would shape those relationships, the way that you would evidence to the regulator who's responsible for what, and align that with your strategic partners is mission critical. Bottom right, data is the new currency. I don't think anybody will frown upon that. For those of you who've been have been in industry long enough, and I've been in industry for over 20 years, there's always been the view that finance or risk should have a common data model. And of course, there's success stories in the market, but overall, it's been a real struggle. One of the things that we're seeing is that data and the kind of roles that data play in the finance function will become more and more important. One final thing I'll lift out of this section is the robotics bits. Again, I'm not sure what your world looks like, but what I'm seeing in my clientele is that robotics are still implemented at various parts of their processes, but they're implemented in a way that they feel they are the strategic solution. We disagree. We really feel that robotics are currently performing activities that are manual, and therefore they serve a purpose for the here and now. But if you set out your data strategy, your cloud strategy, and your wider finance strategy properly, all of those processes should be disappearing anyway and become straight-through processing. Now, finally, future first workforce. If you combine all those dots on the other three sections and you have an organization that has a relatively simplified, standardized data model, leverages the cloud opportunities that are out there, and really moves the dial towards thinking like a venture capitalist, that means your workforce has to change quite drastically. It's less about the die-hard financial accountants that run certain processes. It's more about the financial SMEs almost that understand how an organization is run, understands balance sheets and P&Ls, but doesn't turn the handle on a day-to-day basis to make these things happen. Now, the question then becomes, that's interesting, but what are we actually seeing in terms of the ratio? So how do you know what the size of the prize, if you like, is if you were to create a transformation plan or roadmap that is successful? Now, we've done quite a lot of benchmark studies around the globe over the last couple of years, and I invite you all to have a bit of a Google on our KPMG website of the banking benchmark report. I'm not a massive fan of benchmarking because it's easy to take them out of context, but what I thought I'd do is just give you a little bit of line of sight of which variables, which ratios we would expect to change quite considerably as part of these trends I just described. So on the one side, there's the skills mix, and I mentioned that before. So there will be a shift away from the accountants and far more towards strategists and business process architects. That's really something that we see in the market already, and we expect it to continue. The next bit, and that links into the old saying from scorekeeper to business partner, we are already seeing quite a dramatic change towards value creation in the finance function. So not only turning the handle on day-to-day processes, that is mostly automated, and you can apply that release capacity to focus on more strategic decisions. The last two I'll leave for now, but in a way what we're saying is your IT cost of finance and your FTE cost of finance will change quite drastically in the wider scheme of things. If you wrap your arms around all of those, the little picture on the bottom is the one that kind of summarizes it, right? So over the last 5 to 6 years, I'd say, from 2013 to 16, we saw drivers, which was all about process automation and standardization. Now that in turn created or morphed your finance function shape, and the top level are the senior grades in finance, and the bottom level are the kind of junior analyst grades. We've seen that kind of teardrop shape appear in the middle. What we're expecting now in the next couple of years, due to data integration and digital finance, is to really turn that picture upside down. The slightly skeptical clients that I work with describe it as a coffin. We'd like to be more positive and describe it as a kite, but it means that the size of the finance function will will decrease drastically on the lower levels, because most of that will be automated robotics or a strategic alliance. And it's the horsepower on the more senior levels that understand the industry, understand the organization, that can help drive the strategic direction. Those are going to be in very high demand. Now, listening to our clients, the question then becomes, do they agree with this, and where are they in this journey? Interesting sound bites are that 96% truly believe they need to focus on transformation. Just step change is not good enough anymore, and will get them out of business very, very soon. However, they're not necessarily that confident that they've got all the ingredients in place to drive that level of transformation. That's about 83%. And if you dive a little bit deeper to the different kind of roles, so the CIO, EO, and CFO, then the CIO, they will have a digital strategy, most banks will have, but they're not quite sure if they can be effective in implementing those because they had bad experiences. And I'll come back to that in a minute. 59% of CEOs know that they have to be very agile, and they know that all these kind of pressure points I just described typically require quite a big level of change. That's why we call it transformation. But the average tenure of a CEO and a CFO has dropped quite dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years. So you don't have 5 or 6 years to make your mark. You need to show results a lot quicker than that. And how do you do that? And then finally, the CFOs, almost half of those feel that they really have to start working on strategic alliances to really increase the bottom line and make that transformation happen. Now, question is, how have they fared with that? A lot of them have really, really struggled. And our understanding, our belief is as follows. And we obviously listen to the marketplace. We understand what the requirements are from our clients to us, and it gives us a very fair indication of what they're doing. So in the old world, they started off with number one, which is they heard about cloud technology, they heard about intelligent automation, all the beautiful technology terms, and they started implementing it, right? So during the implementation, the focus was very much on getting the tech to work, right? The focus was less so on really cleaning house and standardizing everything that comes with it. As a result, a lot of these clients have delivered the technology that works, but provides the same results as the old technology, which is inefficiencies, EUCs, workarounds, and spending a fortune on keeping it all up and running. So a number of our clients then made the step change to go, okay, so it can't only be part of the technology problem. We have to look at this from a wider target operating model point of view. So they didn't only look at the technology side, they also looked at how the impact was on their processes, on their people, on their service delivery model, how they changed their support model on technology. So they started to look at it in a far wider sense, and results were increasing, were improving, which was good news. However, they still feel experienced or viewed this kind of transformation very much in a functional view, i.e. when we talk about target operating model, it would only be a particular finance function, a particular risk function, or a treasury function, wherever the technology will be implemented. And what we're seeing now in the industry for the last 18 to 24 months, I'd say, is that our clients move to number 3, which is, I can only reap the benefits of all these new technologies, of a cleaned up data model, if I look at my transformation end to end. How do all these integrated parts connect? What's my roadmap? What's my business case? And what are the transition states? Because that is the critical point. Where do you start? How fast are you going to get there? And what's the next step, right? And we want to make sure that our clients obviously have transition states, that after every phase, they would arrive at something that is steady state and reaps benefits. Now, that's kind of where, to Simon's introduction, our powered philosophy comes into play. Right, so if we look at the left-hand side and we look at the key kind of criteria for success, our view is that clients that have been able to adopt the technology rather than adapt it have been very successful. By introducing cloud as part of your transformation agenda, you are signing up for a mandatory level of standardization. They are going to be running your software for you, and they will be providing you with quarterly or monthly updates. They can only do that for you if you conform to a certain level of standardization, right? Because customizations will break that process. So you need to adopt that technology rather than trying to recreate your current situation and adapt the technology to you. That doesn't work. That also means you need to validate a standardized design rather than designing it from scratch. And that means you are deploying technology rather than building it from scratch. Because what we see in our experience, when you do that, probably 2.5 years down the line, when you've done your build, you start your user acceptance testing, and then it shows that none of it works and the business stamps their feet. What's also important is transformation is not a one big go. You have to be able to provide a step-by-step approach, so be modular, right? Could be that you start your cost ledgers, your MI strategy, general ledger consolidation, whatever it is, but don't do the full Monty, including data lakes, all from day one. It will not work. And the last bit is focus on the business rather than technology. Technology is definitely a key driver. It's a driver, a trigger of opportunities, but it's only one part of the operating model. So where we've come from is we've taken all those kind of key success criteria into mind, and we have invested for about 3 to 4 years globally, so that is well over 100 million at KPMG invested in this, to create those standardized solutions, right? Because remember, clients invite us in to help them with process optimization, with offshoring, with technology improvements. Well, if we have a skill base in that, and we understand the criteria and the implications of cloud-based technologies or wider automation, why would we not create that standard for you? And that's what we've done. The second bit is it integrates across all of the organizational dimensions, not just finance, but includes risk and treasury and the likes. And finally, it's not only slideware, it's actually built in real tools and assets. So we have working SAP solutions, Oracle solutions, Google platforms, Workday platforms. And if you summarize in beautiful consultancy speak on the right, it's really that business transformation solution that jumps out. Everything else is pre-configured and standardized. Focus on the things that wouldn't work for clients rather than making it a technology program. Very briefly, not to sell this to you guys, but if I put this in perspective of what we're seeing in the industry in terms of how far certain clients are pushing this, our powered solution has got 3 key components, and it's a bit of an indicator, a yardstick, if you like, of how far certain clients have pushed this. So on the left-hand side, around the operating model I just described. So if you talk about process controls, reports, your validation points, your workflows, all of that comes standardized out of the box from KPMG. The second bit is the powered execution suite. Right, so what we still see is a lot of our clients have got enormous transformation teams hidden in finance that help with change. Wouldn't it be nice if you can outsource or offshore a lot of the admin, the PMO offices, the progress report, the test reports? So we bring to the forefront a range of different instruments that would really limit the amount of horsepower that our clients have to offer on these programs. Therefore, they can focus on SMEs, on business specialists, on finance specialists that work for them. And finally, number 3 is some of our clients have pushed it even further and have managed service contracts with us to do, for example, regression testing every month or quarter, do e-learning, do automated testing scripts. Now, if you kind of cast your eyes over that overall, that means that if they are setting off on this transformation roadmap, the main thing that they have to bring is obviously a vision and a plan, but they have to bring business and finance expertise, right? Armies and armies of people have kind of moved to the sideways because we're focusing on a business transformation rather than technology. What that gives them on the right-hand side, and that kind of demystifies a lot of the kind of barriers that they have in the moment, is provided that we can do these things, we can show them a working solution in the early phases of the program. So that is a certainty of outcome and a lower risk. And that's exactly where a lot of these transformation programs in the past have failed. And then briefly, which we're very proud of, if I kind of summarize and give you a couple of sound bites of what we've achieved in the marketplace with our clients who've done these transformation programs over the last 2 to 3 years, then there is serious benefit to be gained. If you remember my first slides around how far can they move the dial on their performance and what is there to gain in terms of ratios, you would recognize a couple of very brave numbers here that people actually achieve that. The ones I'm personally most brave or most proud of is 100% business ready and sign off. well before go live, all of my clients will have business sign off that they can do their processes, run their tasks to time and quality in this new platform. And in the end, that's what transformation is all about. Over to you, Simon.
Yeah, Maurice, thanks very much for that presentation. I mean, talking to some of our clients locally, I think it's fair to say, I mean, the average Isle of Man company probably isn't that far along this journey yet. I think it's fair to say, certainly from our client base, but those that have started talking to us about it, you know, it can be quite overwhelming actually when you want to start. You know, it's overwhelming with just the sheer amount of thought leadership KPMG had on the subject, and sort of, you know, how do you digest that down and sort of find out where to start. And I guess picking out from your presentation, it was interesting in the survey that, you know, 96% of companies who are focused on transformation, but yeah, 83% aren't confident that they can build a new operating model. I mean, again, going back to some local client experiences around, well, where on earth do I start and how do I begin this? I mean, you must have spoken to other clients in similar situations.
Yeah, and absolutely. And it's one of the key challenges, right? It is overwhelming. And for those of you who can access the webinar recording later on, if we get the video to work as well, you will see a lot of kind of metaphors of finance and why the kind of CXOs feeling a little bit in free fall, right? Because the pressures are coming everywhere, and you have to almost stay on top with every month and every week, which is overwhelming. And I think our kind of guidance to most of our clients is you can start simple, right? So if you look at the wider kind of landscape, and I'll use the ERP landscape as an example, there are solutions that you could put into play in terms of process orchestration, for example, and still robotics, right? It's still a valuable proposition to have in weeks, right? It doesn't have to be months and years. And what we see with our clients is that when we help them with the strategic vision and we try to make a blueprint of where they are now and how far they want to push it eventually, that's the point in time where you start digesting it and almost dissecting it into different transition states. And those small tools, like process orchestration, as an example, will not only improve your process efficiencies, but it will also give you a very good indication of how polluted your processes are, which then in turn will drive your business case, right? So you get far more realistic outcomes. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be a multi-year program. I think on average, most of our programs start with about 3 to 4 months. And then we get reasonable benefits in play in terms of streamlining processes. If you really want to change part of the architecture and associated operating model, in the old days, you'd be talking about 2.5, 3 years based on this solution that we've developed. And that's not to plug it, but it kind of re-emphasizes the level of standardization that comes with it. They could do it in about 12 months, right? So benefits are bigger and time is a bit shorter, but you have to be brave and conform to standards. One of the golden recipes for most of our programs is that the CFO stands up in front of the program team and the business and goes, we will standardize because we have to. All the pain you're feeling now will go away, but it needs a commitment, right?
Yeah. And certainly I definitely, you know, the point you made around adopting new systems as opposed to adapting those new systems definitely strikes on the chord. I think, you know, some of the larger IT or and finance transformation projects I've seen on the island, you know, clients have fallen back into getting the you know, large IT providers around the world to basically make new systems look like their old systems, and bringing in old processes and actually several years later realizing they missed the trick, and spending hundreds of thousands and millions again to readapt them. And Chris is smirking, so I'm sure we'll come to that in the Q&A as well, Chris. But the other thing, Maurice, we didn't touch on ahead of this was, I guess the other thing for me is the average company in the Isle of Man is relatively small from an employment number. Particularly compared to sort of the clients you're seeing in the UK and worldwide. And I think probably the key message, and if you've got any thoughts on this, is actually smaller business. This is just as applicable to smaller business as it is to a BP or a Shell, right?
Oh, 100%. So if you look at my clientele, I've got my kind of global FS clients. But I also work with building societies in the UK, right? I don't mean the nationwide of this world because they're a bit like a bank. Well, if you look at the building society spectrum in the UK, let's say there's about 50 of them. The middle ground, they're very, very tiny, right? We're doing similar programs with them because they would still have to have the same level of agility and adaptability. And in a way, if you look at the pressures that they feel, they're not that dissimilar from the global clients, right? So they would have other building societies trying to merge with them, acquire them to grow their footprint, because everybody needs to be bigger to have a life expectancy in the industry. So we're working with relatively small building societies where the finance functions are 50 to 60 people, all the way down to global clients where it's in it. You're absolutely right. It applies to both of them, but the levers that they pull will be slightly different, and the benefits that will be slightly different, but the benefits of a transformation of this ilk would equally apply to smaller firms. Yes.
Yeah. And presumably, we touched on, as you mentioned as well, last week we were very much around what does the consumer or customer of tomorrow look like, and what changes have been happening as related with COVID, or potentially those changes and trends that have accelerated because of COVID. Presumably, a big part of this is it's very hard to keep up with the pace of change in a consumer or your competitors and your regulators if you haven't adjusted your back office accordingly, right?
100% agree. I mean, I did a webinar probably about 2 years ago or so on cost and customer insight, we called it. And kind of what it was is, if you look at your customers, and I'm sure Nunwood and my non-week colleagues have outlined this to you guys as well, you look at customer journeys and you look at moments of truth and you look at killer attributes, i.e. what really drives customer behavior, that is a very important part of the equation. That's where the kind of customer insight comes in. The cost insight is, what are we as an organization doing to support those journeys, right? Do we know how efficient or inefficient we are in supporting our clients through those kind of journeys, right? Yeah. Did we know, and this is an actual example from a global insurer, that there's 14 departments that are working on providing a quote for a car insurance? Well, that's biblical, right? So this level of standardization that I'm kind of advocating here would do two things. One of them is it would obviously clean up your process and be more efficient, but it also provides almost like a translation layer to map your customer experience, your cost and revenue per customer, and your back office functions cost to support those customers in one single process taxonomy. So finally, you can combine the front of house customer view with the back office processing side, or to meet their requirements. And I think that's a very critical point, because customer insight is great, customer value is even better.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you. Fantastic, Maurice, thanks very much for that. I think we'll start to open up now and move into sort of the broader panel discussion. For those listening, we will be doing some polls throughout those, so please do interact with us on those. It'll be interesting to see the results. We do plan on sharing all of the poll results from the entire series after today, but subject to time, we'll certainly touch on some of the trends coming through. Chris, we were just talking about the automation there. How are you seeing automation being used with businesses on the island, and how is it aiding their transformation?
It's been fascinating to see recent months the impact of coronavirus in getting people to look more aggressively at things like automation. Yeah. It's fair to say that the coronavirus has not created anything new. It has merely acted as a catalyst to underlying trends. And so I found myself nodding along to much of what Maurice was saying there. For example, in terms of, you talked about the need to adopt, not adapt. The way we've worded it is clients are looking for solutions, not systems. We've had a lot of CEOs say, I know I've got a business problem in a certain area. I want to buy a solution for invoice processing. I want to buy a solution for client onboarding. I want to buy a solution for contract lifecycle management, not give me an IT system. Yeah. I need a solution, and don't let my people meddle with it. Don't let my people corrupt best practice. Implement it hard, implement it fast, minimize the cost, minimize the risk, deliver me the benefits.
Yeah.
So there's real trends away from the old style of buying of systems of I will buy an IT system, then I will amend it and amend it and amend it till frankly it looks very similar to what I had before I'd spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
And taking a much more aggressive approach. Linked to that is cloud. More and more people are saying to me, I'm a wealth manager, say, I'm not an IT company. I don't want to own servers. I don't want to own a vast amount of technological equipment. I want to provide good wealth management services to my clients. Outsource it. I want to be rid of it. And that takes a step even to software solutions. So they don't just want to buy the solution, they want it to be a cloud solution. So the underlying technology, the underlying software and hardware provision is entirely bought in. Excellent example is electronic signatures. There has been an explosion in demand for electronic signatures. I've been promoting that for the last 3 years, and I can think of several clients over that 3-year journey who said, we're interested, we're not quite ready for that yet. We don't think clients are quite ready for that. And yet in the last couple of months, they have there's been an explosion in demand for electronic signatures to replace paper and ink. One client said the introduction of DocuSign through us was a game changer for them. Not only did it deliver them a speed and a quality of service that they couldn't do before with paper, but it exposed to the business the power of cloud solutions. Because DocuSign, like many e-signature solutions, is a cloud solution. You just plug into their APIs and their URL. They're providing the hardware. They're providing the security. They're providing it to a standard that virtually no other business outside of Microsoft and Amazon could possibly do. So why reinvent the wheel? And so we can take a client from saying, yes, I'd like DocuSign, to using it in a week. In a week. IT solution cycles, they're normally measured in months, in some cases years. So the value can be enormous. We had one wealth manager said it was a game changer, and they're now using thousands of DocuSign envelopes to get clients to sign documents. To give you an illustration of the transformative effect, 60% of documents are being signed that working day, 90% by close of play the following day. The cost saving is £27 per document signed. Clients love it. It's got a better audit trail for compliance and regulatory purposes. What is not to like? But what it was new and it was uncertain, and therefore it felt uncomfortable and threatening to some in the business. But once they'd embraced it, once the business saw the potential, they're now saying to us, what's next? What can we innovate next? Because we did that, and actually that went much better than we thought. So next in line I see is EID, electronic identification of individuals. CDD, KYC, call it what you will. It's a massive headache for businesses in the Isle of Man. A huge paper trail of getting original signed, certified copies of passports. And those are relics of the past. FATFA, who most people will know, it's like the regulator's regulator. It's the body that guides regulators. In April, it put out a report saying, we strongly recommend that businesses move to electronic identification and electronic financial services provision. Why? Because it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's much, much more secure. If we look at, say, ID Now is a partner that we have. It has a solution it's developed that's patented across Europe and UK. They have access to the national identity databases of 193 countries. They've developed, spending millions of dollars on artificial intelligence software, machine learning, and specially trained staff to conduct the sort of sophisticated EID solution that most of us can only dream of. So as Maurice said, why would you try and build that? Why would you try and replicate it? Buy it. Look at what your core capabilities are. Look at what you do well and what you don't do so well. Look at what you can buy in. Buy it in. And because again, it's a cloud-based service. To switch it on can be surprisingly simple. The biggest challenges are often the cultural challenges of getting your people to adopt these technologies and the sense of risk attached to that. But once you've got used to it, and once you've started embedding the principles of digital transformation in the organization, you may find you get a strong demand pull from staff who can see the benefits. Because what it can do is it can liberate them from the administrative burden that is so common. When you talk to frontline staff about how busy they are, shuffling paper around a typical financial services organization, if you can take away all of that tedious manual data processing, all that tedious chasing for partially completed documents, and just automate that out of existence, that enables your very skilled and very scarce staff to add more value, to spend more time with the client, to spend more time looking at the risk profile for the business, to spend more time delivering your strategy instead of shuffling bits of paper to each other.
I think I completely agree, and I wish we had a camera for in this room, because you'd see how passionate Chris is about this subject. But you know, I think for me, you know, lots of businesses have looked at some of these technologies before, but they may have looked 5-10 years ago, for example, you know, and when it was early adoption. I think, you know, plug and play is a term we're all used to, and probably started with plugging a USB into your computer and off you went. But actually, realistically, you've got very sophisticated technology solutions, which are pretty much plug and play, as you say, these days. Certainly, you know, we did an RPA or a robotics project with a client, and we could have had their process from engagement letter through to live within a couple of months, automating those processes. And I think people still don't realize how quick and easy it can be, particularly going back to Maurice's point, if you do it modular. I mean, Bryan, I'll turn to you, and a two-pronged question, if I can. But I guess one of the key thoughts is, you know, I know you've managed some IT rollouts before, and we've talked about scoping and why that's so important. So I'd be interested in your view on that. But then also, you know, as you adopt those new technologies, as you digitize certain processes, you know, that does leave a business open to certain new risks that you can't forget. You know, be it cyber, be it data privacy as well. So it'd be interesting to hear your views and discussions you've had with clients on that as well.
Yeah, Simon, thanks. Adopting new technology, I agree with Maurice, and I agree with Chris. There are lots of things out there, and lots of companies who I've worked with and supported have big resources internally trying to deliver adapted technology solutions rather than looking at what is actually out there to save time.
Yeah.
Hits your bottom line because you've got lots of staff, lots of network, lots of hardware, lots of internal infrastructure to do all this, and you spend extensive amounts of time doing security reviews, retweaking, creating development environments, testing, etc., etc. When there's really no need.
Yeah.
The solutions are out there, they've been tested, they've probably been out there with some big companies and entities under them as customer already, who've already done all the hard legwork in getting it right and honed. So the advice I've been giving some entities is look at your own business, look what's available, and then compare and contrast yourself to what the solutions that are available can do for you. And actually, if you changed your operating model, your business processes to match what is there, will you save money? Will you save on the bottom line? And will you be able to deliver more efficiently? Because if you also look at the big software solutions that are out there, they will also have undertaken the key elements that you're going to be worried about as well, which is the general risk, the IT risk, the security risks, and the ever looming and always painful and scary privacy risk that's hitting everybody at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of companies on the island who work in multiple jurisdictions with data from the USA, data from the South American countries, data from Australasia and ASPAC region, and so on and so on. But what are you doing with that data, and how you're handling that data from the privacy perspective, as well as the compliance perspective from AML, CFT, and so on and so on? You've got to have all this data handled in such a way to match each of those nations. How are you keeping control of it?
Yeah.
So why design a system internally trying to understand that when large corporations and companies have already done that for you and are continuously monitoring the regulatory and legislative environment to keep you up to date? So you've got to look at it from the perspective that this can ease your internal burden. The security has already been evaluated. They've undergone operating control reviews. They've undergone ISO 27001. You know, if you're using AWS or Azure for your cloud solutions, they are so secure, even at the basic cheap level that you may want to go to match your budget, that actually you're covering most of the requirements for that data whilst it's being held there to meet the requirements of the regulators, whether that's the Financial Commission, whether it's national governments and what they're putting on cybersecurity, whether it's information commissioners and supervisory authorities, and how you're doing with your data and when you're going to use it and what you're doing to move it around your organization that's multi-jurisdictional.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's teams of IT in-house developers that probably don't agree with our view, but certainly I do. I mean, but for me, you know, considering privacy, considering cyber, considering everything Chris has touched on, to me a lot of this still comes back to scoping. And scoping these projects properly, and that's, you know, that the question back to Maurice, you know, where do you start? You know, where I've seen these things go wrong before is where a board agrees, yes, this is a great idea, and then they over delegate. They delegate the implementation down below the C-suite level, down to the operators. And let's be clear, most people don't like change. They don't want to change. They want to start out their computer in the morning, go to the make a cup of tea, come back, and everything's the same as it was yesterday. But if you don't adapt, if you don't change if you're not really mindful when you're setting that scope and make that scope really rigid at the very, very beginning, that's where then you run into problems, right? I mean, Chris, have you seen that in any of the projects here where people have changed halfway through?
Absolutely. It's critical to build a business case right from the start and get executive ownership to the business case. Right. Why are you doing this? You know, unless you're crystal clear what this project's going to deliver, and you've got clear key performance indicators of how you're going to measure it's being delivered, and you've got champions in the business at executive level who are championing it and to own that benefits realization, then the project has got a high likelihood of failure from the outset. I've seen countless projects fail, and I've never seen a project fail due to technology. They almost always fail due to lack of sponsorship at an executive level and allow individuals to subvert it because they're too busy doing other things or feel threatened by it on a personal level. And we need to be very honest about that. We've got to say we are officers for organizations, and we had a fiduciary duty to those organizations to deliver the best possible results. That's why they pay us salaries. And so we've got to make sure as executives, right down to frontline staff, we're genuinely working the best interests of our employer. And we need to ensure that the performance measures for success for the organization and for the change initiative and for the individual are aligned. I saw it countless times, not least in government, where those three were not aligned, where an individual could succeed while he watched the project fail. And so surprise, surprise, the project failed. An individual has to feel skin in the game. It has to feel that the organization cannot thrive unless the project succeeds, and then they will reap the rewards for that success.
I mean, Simon, if I can just add on to what Chris is saying, totally get your key performance indicators right, but also make sure you've got your key risk indicators, know them, be adaptive, and at every stage when going from the business case, from the concept, make sure your business case allows for incremental change, because if you don't have incremental change, you will swamp. I worked on a big change program in the UK before I came over to the Isle of Man, which was the biggest change program in UK government's history, and the whole process was change by increment, bring the lower level staff into the program, get them involved, and use them to guide the executives and the board on what is required, what culture will accept in a stepped manner. That program delivered. You know, it wasn't my program myself, but I was the chief of staff of it. It was massive. It was absolutely enormous, and it resulted in brand new legislation going through Parliament and the House of Lords to get this program delivered. And it worked because the staff were taken on board and matched their culture. Change agents, have them across the organisation to support and drive it, but give them the power from the board to act as it and get rid of change resistors.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge. You know, we know that many of our listeners will be non-exec directors, for example, and many of them may not have been through this process before. And their job is to challenge and probe. And I think there's a real it's a bit of a gap there, isn't there? You know, around the sort of the experience of those that are charged with the governance. And here we are saying it should be up in the board level, and you can see why clients fall into traps and want to delegate below, because they delegate to people who they think know better. But it's a real challenge. But you know, there is a lot of help out there, I think, for non-execs to get up to speed on this sort of stuff. It's interesting as we go through some of the polls. At the moment, we've got real concerns around data breaching. Absolutely, Bryan touches to your point around data privacy and being left behind. That's quite an even split, but the actual process itself And then equally, before, it's interesting that the most businesses felt confident they could deliver it though, which was different to the trend in the UK. When 83% were not confident that they could deliver, but yet in the Isle of Man we have essentially 99% believe that they can confidently deliver these programs. So yeah, that's interesting, and it'll be interesting to do that poll again, perhaps when they've gone through the scoping process. And 57% of businesses do use automation on the island, which is great. That's probably a little higher than I expected, actually. And I genuinely hope, from the legacy of COVID and the remote working ways and the digital revolution, I think it could easily be said, I do hope that significantly changes going forward. Just looking at,
could I just pick up?
Definitely, Chris, absolutely, please do.
For me, there is an awful lot to take in.
There is.
The starting point should be the customer. How are customers changing? And if people take nothing away from this, but this point is, don't assume that customer attitudes of yesterday will be customer attitudes of today or tomorrow. Yeah. They are changing incredibly fast, with a couple of core trends that have been massively accelerated by coronavirus. People want everything online, for one, and they want everything online now, not tomorrow, not in an hour, now. And they want it not on a computer, they want it on a mobile phone.
Yeah.
And if you cannot deliver your core services on a mobile phone today, then I would strongly recommend you start thinking about how to do so.
Yeah.
And people will say, oh, for the Isle of Man, well, we deliver services primarily to high net worths in the wealth management sector, or to businesses. And in those two, it's always going to be about face-to-face. That's always what's going to be closing the deal. And I would say, yes, 3-4 years ago, you'd be absolutely right. And I'd say today, all of the surveys show that you're wrong.
Yeah.
The latest survey of high net worths themselves, when asked what was their preferred means of working with their service partners, today, half said via mobile phone, via app and solutions on their mobile phone. 10% said face-to-face. That's a 5-to-1 ratio, which 5 years ago, you would have been flipped the other way.
Yeah.
So please believe me when I say customer attitudes are changing incredibly quickly, and in business too. Pre-COVID, in business-to-business sales, the line was, "You'll never close a multi-million-dollar sale unless you're shaking the guy's hand." Just you can't do it. And now all of the surveys coming out of the UK and the US in particular are showing there are multi-million-dollar deals being sealed every day now, where there's never been any physical contact between the two parties.
Yeah.
They've done their due diligence on the internet, they've met via video conferencing, and then sealed the deal. And so once you start to understand the scale of those changes, it has very logical ripple through effects for how you structure your business and how you go to market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those that are in the wealth space, if you're thinking that your customers, certainly today or even tomorrow, are just the grey-haired, wealthy who finish their careers and enjoying their retirement. Actually, the reality is that the high net worths are getting much, much younger every single day. But actually, even on the flip side, and we saw this last week, the over 65s have become incredibly digitally savvy, as our research has shown. So yeah, I agree. They've been using their online bank. Why wouldn't they be wanting to see their wealth elsewhere? Guys, thank you very much for that. What I want to do now is just really do a wrap up for this series and pull it together. You should all be aware of our 4R model by now, and obviously this series has really been talking about adapting to that new world, the new trends that we're seeing. Again, as a reminder, so recovery, if you're in a recovery mode in particular, and most businesses are out of reaction and resilience in the Isle of Man now, you're identifying those opportunities. If you're in new reality, you're adapting to that new world, and you're already in your post-pandemic models. You're digitally savvy, and digital is fully embedded in BAU. Many businesses, I think, on the island think they're there. Potentially, I think, hopefully, the series has shown them that actually there is more that they could do in what is the art of possible. But really, what I wanted to do is just pull together all the different trends that we've talked about. The Isle of Man needs to reshape for the future. We heard that from Minister Cannon at the beginning. and very much around a new medium to long-term economic strategy is very much needed. I know government are focused on that. You know, we've heard about how the pre-COVID trends are largely accelerated, and some argue there's nothing new. Some argue no, life's changed forever, and it is down to COVID. So we won't get into that debate again, but it's a good one for us around a dinner table. Certainly, commercial real estate will change forever. We heard that from Mark Grace and the Tavir Group. You know, flexible working is here to stay. You know, we know there are commercial landlords on the island looking at how do they repurpose their stock, adapt it to that new way of working. Certainly, you know, we're more than aware of some businesses already giving notice on leases, and others looking at how do I have a nicer meeting room space or a different sort of flexible working space for my staff. You know, we talked about ESG with greater focus from investors, no doubt. You know, ESG companies or those that adopt ESG principles are certainly seem to be outperforming. You know, customers and staff expect businesses to adhere to ESG ways of working and interacting with the world. We talked about volatility in the stock markets, whether that brings opportunities or not. And again, the great conclusion I think was really it depends on what type of investor you are. You know, as I think has proven since we did that webinar a few weeks ago, the markets have continued to be very volatile, and it's the brave-hearted ones that try and play that. If you spend every minute looking at the stock markets. You know, we talked about what type of recovery will it be: V shape, U shape, W, L. I had someone I think brought in a K shape as well, which is quite interesting. Which is COVID continues to deteriorate, but somehow stock markets continue to go up. So you know we've covered a lot of that, but equally we heard from Peel Hunt around private equity continues to be that growing trend. You know, the IPO is not the only route. It's a great route. It's a well-trodden route, but it's not the only route. And certainly many businesses on the Isle of Man, of course, are getting used to private equity ownership and the change in ways that they behave as a result. You know, we've seen the capital markets have completely refueled corporate balance sheets. You know, we heard from the minister yesterday. He's looking to refuel the governments, potentially through some lending. But it's very clear that liquidity is key. You know, we've heard from the banks. We know that people are borrowing and have learned their lessons from the last recession, so that they weather the storm properly. And then, you know, last week we talked about consumers. You know, they will do business with brands that they trust, and that trust was fundamental. And 90% of you agreed that trust was central to that. And certainly the Big Four and our firm are busy rebuilding trust in our profession. Consumers are cautious when spending. I think that's not just the recessionary trends. I think people are beginning to get a lot more picky. You know, we've seen what's happened with Boohoo around how their approach to staffing, and that impacted the consumer straight away, as well as stock markets and investors. And customers expect to interact across multiple channels. And most importantly, all of those are to be tech enabled in many of the different ways we talked about this morning, whether it's on the front end with the customer, whether it's the back end. But I think the big conclusion that I've heard today is you cannot have a slick front end without a slick back end, because it simply won't work. I'd just like to really thank you, and from all of the KPMG team, for joining us for this series. Certainly we've enjoyed doing it, and thank you for our regulars that have listened. And thank you to my guests today, so Maurice, Chris and Bryan. The replay, as always, will be available this afternoon from our website, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Bye for now.